The telegraph key clicked under Gemma Grant's fingers, so fast the sound blurred into a continuous hum. And every station operator within 500 miles knew her signature speed before they ever learned her name. Her swollen belly pressed against the edge of the desk in the cramped telegraph office in Council Bluffs, Iowa. But her hands never faltered, never slowed, transmitting messages across the Western Union lines with a precision that made veteran operators shake their heads in disbelief. It was late September in 1878, and the autumn wind rattled the windows while Gemma worked through the afternoon rush. Her dark hair pinned back in a practical bun, her green eyes focused on the copper key that sang beneath her touch. The door opened, bringing in a gust of cool air and dust from the street. Gemma finished the message she was sending to Omaha without looking up, her concentration absolute. Only when she tapped out the final sequence did she raise her eyes to see who had entered. He stood in the doorway like something carved from the prairie itself, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of winter sky. His hat was dusty from the trail, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who spent more time in the saddle than on foot. When their eyes met, something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that had nothing to do with prior acquaintance. "Help you?" Gemma asked, her voice steady despite the sudden quickening of her pulse. "Need to send a telegram to Cheyenne," he said, his voice low and rough like wind through dry grass. He stepped closer to the counter, and she noticed the way he moved, careful and deliberate. "Name's Jacob Emerson." "Gemma Grant," she replied, pulling a message form toward her. "What do you need to say?" He dictated the message slowly. Something about cattle and delivery schedules, but Gemma found herself distracted by his hands as he gestured, strong and calloused, the hands of a man who worked for his living. She wrote down the words with mechanical efficiency, her professional training taking over even as part of her mind wandered to improper thoughts about this stranger with the winter sky eyes. "That will be 60 cents, she said when he finished. Jacob paid, counting out the coins carefully into her palm. His fingers brushed hers, and she felt the contact like a spark jumping from wire to wire. He must have felt it too because he pulled back quickly, clearing his throat. "You work this office alone?" he asked, glancing around the small room. "I do," Gemma replied, already positioning her fingers over the telegraph key. "The previous operator left for California 3 months ago. They had trouble finding a replacement until I applied." "That your husband's decision?" "Letting you work in your condition." The question was presumptuous but not unkind. Gemma felt her jaw tighten anyway. "I am a widow, Mr. Emerson. My husband died of fever last winter. This job keeps me fed and housed, and I am very good at it." Something flickered across Jacob's face, regret perhaps. "I apologize, that was not my place to ask." "No, it was not." But her voice held less frost now. She appreciated a man who could admit his mistakes. "Will you be waiting for a reply, if one comes?" he said. "How long might that take?" Gemma's fingers were already flying over the key, sending his message racing along the copper wires toward Wyoming territory. "Depends on how quickly the Cheyenne operator responds. Could be 5 minutes, could be an hour. There is a bench outside if you would rather wait in the sun." "I will wait here if that suits you." It did suit her, though she would not admit it. Gemma turned her attention to the incoming messages, her hands moving with practiced speed as she transcribed the clicks and pauses into words. She was aware of Jacob watching her, could feel the weight of his gaze, but she did not let it disrupt her rhythm. The key sang beneath her fingers, faster than most men could follow, faster than anyone in this part of Iowa had ever heard. "How did you learn to work that thing so fast?" Jacob asked after watching her for several minutes. "Practice," Gemma said without looking up. "And necessity." The faster I work, the more messages I can handle. The more messages I handle, the more valuable I am to Western Union. The more valuable I am, the more secure my position. You sound like a woman who thinks ahead. I am a woman who has to think ahead, Mr. Emerson. I have a child coming in 3 months and no husband to help provide. Thinking ahead is what keeps us alive. The key began clicking with an incoming message, and Gemma's attention snapped to it completely. Her hand moved to her pencil, transcribing the Morse code into letters, then words, then sentences. It was a reply to Jacob's telegram, and it was not good news judging by the content. "Your buyer in Cheyenne says the price has dropped," she said, tearing off the message form and handing it to him. 40 cents a head instead of 55. Jacob's jaw tightened as he read, "Damn cheating." He stopped himself, glancing at Gemma. "Pardon my language. I have heard worse." She had heard much worse, particularly from angry men receiving bad news by telegraph. "Do you want to send a reply?" "Yes." Jacob's voice was hard now, the easy warmth gone. He dictated a terse response, negotiating terms, pushing back against the price drop. Gemma sent it without comment, her fingers moving so fast the individual clicks became almost indistinguishable. This time Jacob did not just watch. He stepped closer to the desk, studying her hands, the way she worked the key with barely any visible movement. "I have never seen anyone operate that fast, not in any town I have been through." "Then you have not been through many towns with good operators," Gemma said, but she felt a flush of pride at the compliment. "I have been through more towns than I can count, Mrs. Grant. And I know skill when I see it." The reply from Cheyenne came back quickly, another counteroffer. Jacob sent another response. The negotiation continued back and forth for the better part of an hour, with Gemma serving as the lightning-fast conduit between buyer and seller. Her back began to ache from sitting and the baby kicked against her ribs, but she kept working, kept transmitting, her speed never flagging. Finally, Jacob and his buyer reached an agreement. He paid for all the additional messages, a considerable sum, and then stood there as if reluctant to leave. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Gemma looked up at him, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "You can ask. How far along are you?" 6 months, near as the doctor can figure. "And you are managing this job alone, the long hours, the physical strain." "I am managing because I must, Mr. Emerson. The alternative is charity or worse, and I will not subject my child to that." Jacob nodded slowly, as if coming to some internal decision. "I will be in town for a few days, settling business. May I call on you again?" "Not for telegrams," he added quickly. "Just to talk." Gemma knew she should say no. She knew nothing about this man except that he dealt in cattle and could negotiate hard when necessary. But there was something in his eyes, in the careful way he spoke to her, that made her want to say yes. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her as a woman rather than a pregnant widow or a telegraph operator. "I finish work at 6, she said. "I rent a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house on 4th Street. If you want to walk me home, I would not object." "I will be here at 6, Jacob said, and the way he smiled transformed his entire face, made him look younger and less careworn. He left then, and Gemma returned to her work, but her mind kept drifting to the cowboy with the winter sky eyes. She told herself she was being foolish, that she had no time for romance with a baby on the way and a job to protect. But her heart had its own ideas, and it beat a little faster every time she thought of 6 o'clock. The afternoon passed in a blur of messages, some routine, some urgent. Gemma handled them all with the same swift efficiency, her fingers dancing over the telegraph key. She took pride in her work, in the fact that she could outpace any male operator in the region. It was not just about speed, though. It was about accuracy, about understanding the rhythm of the code, about being able to hear through static and interference to catch every word. At 5:45, she began tidying her desk, organizing the message forms, preparing the office for whoever would take the night shift. Western Union had hired a retired railroad man for the overnight hours, a gruff older fellow who worked slowly but steadily. He arrived precisely at 6, grunting a greeting as he took over her station. Gemma stood, wincing as her back protested. 6 months pregnant and working long hours was taking its toll, but she would not complain. She had seen women work right up until their labor pains started, had heard stories of her own mother harvesting vegetables with contractions already begun. She could manage a telegraph key for a few more months. Jacob was waiting outside, leaning against the hitching post with his hat tipped back. He straightened when he saw her, offering his arm. "Mrs. Grant," he said formally. "Mr. Emerson," she replied, taking his arm. The gesture felt strange and wonderful after months of walking alone. They walked in silence for a block, and then Jacob said, "Tell me about yourself." "Where are you from originally?" "Pennsylvania," Gemma said. "My father was a telegraph operator for the railroad. He taught me the trade when I was young, said it would give me options in life. I married at 18, moved west with my husband. He wanted to farm, thought Iowa offered opportunities." She paused, the familiar ache of loss settling in her chest. He was right about the opportunities. Wrong about his ability to survive his first winter here. "I am sorry," Jacob said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Thank you. It has been 9 months now. The grief is still there, but it has dulled to something manageable." Gemma glanced at him. "What about you?" "Where does a cattle dealer come from?" "Texas originally," Jacob said. "My family had a ranch outside of San Antonio. I learned the cattle business from my father, learned to ride before I could walk. But there were 5 boys in our family and only 1 ranch. I struck out on my own when I was 20, been dealing cattle ever since." "Do you miss it? Having a permanent home?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes, but I like the freedom too, the ability to go where the work takes me. Every town is different, every deal is different. Keeps life interesting." They reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a neat 2-story structure painted white with blue shutters. Gemma stopped at the gate, reluctant to let go of Jacob's arm. "Thank you for walking me home," she said. "May I do so again tomorrow? I would like that." Jacob touched the brim of his hat. "Until tomorrow, then, Mrs. Grant." She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the distance, and then she went inside to face Mrs. Henderson's knowing looks and pointed questions. Over the next 3 days, Jacob appeared at the telegraph office every morning with some excuse for sending a message. Gemma saw through the pretense, knew he was paying good money just for the chance to talk to her, and she should have discouraged it. Instead, she found herself looking forward to his visits, to the sound of his voice dictating unnecessary telegrams, to the way he watched her hands fly over the telegraph key. Each evening, he walked her home. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Jacob told her about trail drives and stampedes, about nights sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Gemma told him about growing up in a telegraph office, about the music she heard in Morse code, about the loneliness of widowhood. On the 4th evening, as they stood outside Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, Jacob took both her hands in his. "Gemma," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to be honest with you. I have business in Cheyenne that cannot wait much longer. I should have left 2 days ago." Her heart sank. "Then why have you not?" "Because of you." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "Because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I walked into that telegraph office. Because I keep reading your messages twice, memorizing every word you send, just to have more time near you. Gemma's breath caught. Jacob, I am 6 months pregnant with another man's child. I am hardly the sort of woman a traveling cattle dealer should be interested in. You are exactly the sort of woman I should be interested in, Jacob said fiercely. You are strong, independent, brilliant at your work. You are beautiful and brave, and you make me want to stop traveling, to put down roots, to build something permanent. You have known me 4 days. I know, and yet I have never been more certain of anything in my life. He lifted one of her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I am not asking you to marry me today, Gemma, but I am asking if you would consider it, eventually, when you are ready. She should say no. She should protect herself, protect her unborn child. But when she looked into Jacob's winter sky eyes, she saw only sincerity and hope, and something that looked very much like love. Ask me again in a few months, she said softly. After the baby is born, after we have had more time to know each other properly. Does that mean you want me to stay in Council Bluffs? It means I want you to do what makes sense for your business. But if that business happens to keep you nearby, I would not object to more evening walks. Jacob's smile was brilliant. I can think of several reasons to base my operations out of Iowa for the next few months. The rail connections are good, the cattle prices are fair, and the telegraph operator is the finest I have ever encountered. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Gemma felt something inside her chest unlock, a tightness she had been carrying since her husband's death finally loosening. Jacob did stay in Council Bluffs. He took a room at the hotel, established connections with local ranchers and buyers, and made the town his base of operations. Every day he found reasons to visit the telegraph office. Every evening he walked Gemma home. On Sundays, her only day off, they attended church together and scandalized the gossips by taking unchaperoned walks along the Missouri River. Mrs. Henderson appointed herself as Gemma's protector and interrogated Jacob thoroughly about his intentions. He answered every question honestly, never showing offense, until even the stern boarding house proprietor admitted he seemed to be a decent man. As October turned to November and the weather grew colder, Gemma's belly grew larger. She had to adjust her desk chair, had to take more frequent breaks, but her hands never slowed on the telegraph key. She took pride in that, in maintaining her speed and accuracy even as her body changed. Jacob worried constantly. He wanted her to rest more, to let Western Union find another operator, but Gemma refused. I need this job, she reminded him. I need the income, the independence. What if I could provide those things? Jacob asked one evening as they sat in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, the boarding house owner serving as reluctant chaperone. We are not married, Jacob. We are not even engaged officially. Then let us make it official. He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. Gemma Grant, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to your child? Will you build a life with me? Gemma's hands flew to her mouth. Jacob, I love you, he said simply. I love your strength, your skill, your stubborn independence. I love the way you work that telegraph key like you are making music. I love everything about you, and I want to spend my life proving it. Yes, Gemma whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat loudly. About time, she said gruffly. I will start making arrangements for the wedding. They married 3 weeks later in the Methodist church, with half the town in attendance. Gemma wore a simple dress that accommodated her swollen belly, and Jacob wore his best suit. The minister gave a sermon about second chances and the mysterious ways of providence, and when Jacob kissed his bride, Gemma felt tears streaming down her face. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a modest structure with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen. Jacob bought furniture, fixed the roof, chopped enough firewood to last through winter. He traveled less, conducting more of his business by telegraph, and Gemma sent his messages with fingers that flew faster than ever, transmitting his words with love infused in every click of the key. December arrived with snow and bitter cold. Gemma finally, reluctantly, agreed to reduce her hours at the telegraph office. She worked mornings only now, training a young man named Thomas to take over her afternoon shifts. He was competent but slow, and it frustrated her to listen to his plodding pace on the key. "He will improve," Jacob assured her. "You were not always the fastest operator in 5 states." "Yes, I was," Gemma said, and Jacob laughed and kissed her until she laughed too. On a frozen morning in late December, Gemma woke to pain radiating through her back and belly. She tried to ignore it to get dressed for work, but another contraction doubled her over. "Jacob," she gasped, and he was there immediately, helping her back to bed. "I am getting the doctor," he said, pulling on his boots. "Do not leave me. I will be back in 5 minutes, I promise." He was true to his word, returning with Dr. Carson, an elderly man who had delivered half the babies in Council Bluffs. Mrs. Henderson arrived shortly after, taking charge with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. The labor was long and difficult. Gemma had heard other women describe childbirth, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it, for the pain that seemed to split her in two. Jacob stayed by her side the entire time, letting her grip his hands until she feared she might break his fingers, whispering encouragement, wiping her forehead with cool cloths. When the baby finally came, crying lustily in the winter morning, Dr. Carson announced, "You have a son, Mrs. Emerson." A son. Gemma held the tiny, red-faced bundle and felt her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn brown, and he was absolutely perfect. Jacob leaned over them both, his expression one of wonder. "What should we name him?" "His father's name was Samuel," Gemma said softly. "Samuel Grant. I would like to honor that, but I want him to be your son too. Could we call him Samuel Jacob?" "Samuel Jacob Emerson," Jacob said, testing the name. "It sounds right." He reached out tentatively, and Gemma placed the baby in his arms. Jacob held his son with the same careful reverence he showed when handling delicate things, his face transformed by love. "I am his father now," Jacob said quietly. "In every way that matters. I will raise him, protect him, teach him to be a good man." "I know you will," Gemma said, and she had never been more certain of anything. Recovery from childbirth took longer than Gemma expected. For the first 2 weeks she could barely walk, and the exhaustion was profound. Samuel nursed constantly, slept in short bursts, and cried for mysterious reasons at all hours. Jacob hired a woman from town to help with cooking and cleaning, and he took over many of the household tasks himself, unbothered by work some men would consider beneath them. On New Year's Day, 1879, Gemma finally felt strong enough to walk to the telegraph office. Thomas was on duty, plodding through a message with painful slowness. When he saw her, his face lit up with relief. "Mrs. Emerson, thank God. The messages have been piling up, and I cannot handle the volume alone." Gemma looked at the stack of unsent forms, felt the familiar pull of her work. But Samuel was at home with the hired woman, and her breasts ached with milk, and she was still so tired. "I cannot come back yet," she said. "But I can show you some techniques to improve your speed." She spent an hour working with Thomas, demonstrating the economy of movement that made her so fast, explaining the rhythm of efficient telegraphy. He was a willing student, and by the end of the session, his speed had improved noticeably. "Practice," Gemma told him. Every day, work on moving faster while maintaining accuracy. You can do this. Over the next few weeks, she visited the office several times, continuing to mentor Thomas, but her focus had shifted. Samuel was her priority now, this tiny life that depended on her completely. She still loved telegraphy, still felt the music in Morse code, but motherhood had claimed a larger piece of her heart. Jacob's business was thriving. He had established himself as one of the most reliable cattle dealers in the region, known for honest dealing and fair prices. The money came in steadily, enough to keep them comfortable, to save for the future. In late February, Jacob came home with news. "There is an opportunity in Omaha," he said. "A partnership with a large ranching operation. It would mean more money, more stability. But it would also mean moving." Gemma looked around their small house, at the life they had built in Council Bluffs. She thought of the telegraph office, of the work she loved but could not fully commit to anymore. She thought of new beginnings and second chances. "When would we leave?" she asked. "Not until spring. Late April, early May, after the winter breaks and the roads are passable. Then we should start planning." They told Mrs. Henderson first, and the older woman surprised them both by crying. "I will miss you," she said, dabbing at her eyes with her apron. "You have become like family." "You can visit," Gemma said, embracing her. "Omaha is not so far." They told the congregation at church, Gemma's colleagues at the telegraph office, the shopkeepers and neighbors who had become friends. Everyone wished them well, though many expressed sadness at their departure. Thomas was promoted to head operator, and he came to the house to thank Gemma personally. "I could never have done this without your training," he said. "You are the best operator I have ever known." "You will be just as good," Gemma told him, "with time and practice." As the days lengthened and the snow melted, Gemma found herself looking forward to the move rather than dreading it. Council Bluffs had been good to her, but it was also full of memories of loss and hardship. Omaha represented a fresh start, a new chapter. They left on a bright morning in early May, their belongings packed in a wagon Jacob had purchased. Samuel, now 4 months old, traveled in a basket cushioned with blankets. The journey took 2 days, traveling the rough roads between Iowa and Nebraska. Omaha was larger than Council Bluffs, more bustling and industrial. The city sprawled along the Missouri River, full of warehouses and stockyards, hotels and saloons. Jacob had rented a house in a respectable neighborhood, a larger place with 3 bedrooms and a proper parlor. "Room to grow," he said as he showed Gemma through it. "Are you expecting more children, Mr. Emerson?" she asked with a smile. "I am hoping for more children, Mrs. Emerson, if you are willing." She kissed him by way of answer, baby Samuel gurgling happily between them. Jacob's partnership proved lucrative. He worked long hours but came home every night, always eager to hold his son, to help with whatever needed doing. Gemma focused on homemaking and motherhood, though she sometimes missed the telegraph key, missed the swift click of code beneath her fingers. One afternoon in late June, she bundled Samuel into his pram and walked downtown to the Western Union office. Inside, 3 operators worked at a long counter, sending and receiving messages. Gemma watched their hands, mentally critiquing their technique, seeing where they wasted movement. The supervisor noticed her watching. "Can I help you, madam? I am a telegraph operator," Gemma said, "or I was. I am the fastest in the Midwest, or at least I used to be." The supervisor raised an eyebrow skeptically. "That is quite a claim. It is the truth. If you have a key to spare, I can demonstrate." The man gestured to an unused station. "By all means." Gemma positioned herself at the desk, adjusting the chair, flexing her fingers. It had been months since she worked a key regularly, but the muscle memory remained. She began sending a practice message, and within seconds, her hands found their old rhythm. The key blurred beneath her fingers, clicking so fast it seemed almost continuous. The three working operators stopped to watch. The supervisor's jaw dropped. "Good Lord," he breathed. "I have never seen speed like that." Gemma finished the sequence and looked up. "I am not looking for full-time work, but if you need someone for overflow, for rush periods, I would be interested in occasional shifts." "We could certainly use someone of your caliber," the supervisor said quickly. "Could you work mornings? Say 3 days a week?" Gemma thought of Samuel, of finding someone to watch him for a few hours. She thought of how much she missed this, the satisfaction of work done well and fast. "Let me discuss it with my husband," she said. "I will send word by the end of the week." Jacob was supportive when she told him, "If this is what you want, we will make it work. We can hire someone to watch Samuel while you are at the office." They found a widow named Mrs. Palmer, who was delighted to earn extra money caring for the baby. Starting in July, Gemma worked mornings at the Omaha Western Union office 3 days a week. She quickly became the favorite among the supervisors, the one they called on when important messages needed to be sent quickly and accurately. The other operators treated her with respect bordering on awe. They asked her to teach them her techniques, and she spent break times demonstrating, explaining, coaching. She made friends among the staff, particularly a young woman named Rose who reminded Gemma of herself at that age, eager and talented and determined to excel. The months passed in a rhythm of work and family. Samuel grew rapidly, learning to sit up, then to crawl, then to pull himself up on furniture. He had his biological father's dark coloring but Jacob's smile, and everyone who met him remarked on what a happy baby he was. In the fall, Gemma realized she was pregnant again. The discovery brought mixed emotions, joy at the prospect of another child but also worry about managing work and 2 babies. When she told Jacob, he swept her into his arms and spun her around. "We are expanding our family," he said, laughing. "This is wonderful news. You are not worried about the expense, the logistics. We will manage. We always do." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Gemma was not dealing with grief and poverty alongside the physical changes. She worked through her second trimester, finally stopping in January when her belly made it difficult to sit at the Telegraph desk comfortably. Their second child, a daughter, was born in late March of 1880. They named her Grace Margaret, and she came into the world with less drama than Samuel, arriving after only 6 hours of labor. She had Jacob's blue eyes and Gemma's dark hair, and she was absolutely perfect. Jacob was besotted with his daughter. He held her for hours, sang to her in his rough voice, carried her everywhere. Samuel, now 15 months old, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to touch her gently, to bring her toys. Gemma returned to work 3 months after Grace's birth, managing somehow to balance 2 children and her telegraph duties. Mrs. Palmer proved invaluable, caring for both children with patience and love. The years flowed by like water. Samuel grew tall and serious, interested in books and learning. Grace was wild and fearless, always climbing things she should not, always asking questions. In 1882, Gemma gave birth to twin boys, Matthew and Michael, and the house was suddenly full to bursting with noise and chaos and love. Jacob expanded his business, taking on additional partners, opening offices in multiple cities. The money came in steadily, enough to move to a larger house, to hire additional help, to save for the children's futures. Gemma reduced her work hours as the family grew, but she never stopped completely. The telegraph key remained her connection to the world beyond home and children, her reminder that she was more than just a wife and mother. She was still the fastest operator in the region, and everyone knew it. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November of 1888, Jacob took Gemma to dinner at the finest restaurant in Omaha. The children stayed home with Mrs. Palmer, and for one evening they were just a couple again, not parents, not business partners. "You ever regret it?" Jacob asked over dessert. "Marrying me, giving up your full-time career." Gemma reached across the table and took his hand. "I have never regretted you, not for a single moment. As for my career, I did not give it up. I just adjusted it to fit the life we built together. You could have been legendary. The fastest telegraph operator in the country. Everyone would know your name." "The right people know my name," Gemma said firmly. "Every operator in this region knows who I am, what I can do. And more importantly, my children know I am their mother. You know I am your wife. That matters more than fame." "I love you," Jacob said. "I have loved you since the day I walked into that telegraph office in Council Bluffs and watched your hands fly over that key." "I know," Gemma said, smiling. "I know because you kept sending unnecessary telegrams and reading my messages twice. I wanted to memorize your work. Every word, every letter. It was the only excuse I could think of to spend time near you. It was a good excuse, and it worked." They walked home through the cool November evening, arm in arm, talking about their children, their plans, their dreams. The moon was bright overhead and the streets were quiet. When they reached their house, light spilled from the windows and they could hear children's laughter from inside. "This is what I wanted," Jacob said, stopping to look at the house. "Not just a wife and children, but this specifically. You, our family, the life we built together. Everything that matters is right here." Gemma leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "Everything that matters," she agreed. The next decade brought more changes, more growth. Samuel went off to university to study law. Grace declared her intention to become a doctor, scandalizing some and delighting others. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief together. In 1895, Western Union approached Gemma with an offer. They wanted to hire her as a training supervisor to travel to telegraph offices across the region teaching other operators her techniques. The salary was generous, the position prestigious. Gemma was 52 years old, her children mostly grown. She sat with Jacob in their parlor discussing the offer. "You should do it," Jacob said. "The children are independent now. I can manage things here. This is an incredible opportunity." "It would mean traveling," Gemma said, "being away for weeks at a time." "I have spent years traveling for business. Now it is your turn. Take the job, Gemma. Show them what you can do." So she did. For the next 5 years, Gemma traveled across the Midwest, visiting telegraph offices, training operators, sharing the techniques that had made her legendary. She taught hundreds of telegraphers to work faster, more efficiently. She wrote training manuals that became standard texts for Western Union. She finally got the recognition her skills deserved. But she always came home to Jacob, to their house in Omaha, to the life they had built together. No matter how many cities she visited, how many accolades she received, home was where her heart lived. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Gemma retired from Western Union. She was 57 years old, her hands finally showing the first signs of arthritis, her fingers not quite as swift as they once were. She had trained enough operators, written enough manuals, earned enough respect. It was time to rest. Samuel was a successful lawyer in Chicago, married with 3 children of his own. Grace had indeed become a doctor, working in a hospital in Denver and causing a revolution wherever she went. Matthew and Michael ran a thriving business importing agricultural equipment. All 4 children were happy, successful, living good lives. Jacob retired the same year, selling his business interests and finally settling into the life of a gentleman farmer. They bought a small property outside Omaha, with enough land for a garden and a few animals, but nothing too demanding. On a warm evening in late spring, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Jacob took Gemma's hand, his fingers lacing through hers in a gesture worn smooth by decades of repetition. "You remember the first time I saw you?" he asked. "You walked into the Telegraph office in Council Bluffs," Gemma said. "You needed to send a message to Cheyenne. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And then you started working that telegraph key, and I realized you were brilliant too. I was lost from that first moment. You sent so many unnecessary telegrams," Gemma said, laughing. "You must have spent a fortune courting me. Best money I ever spent." Jacob lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles the way he had on that long-ago evening outside Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. "I used to read your messages twice, you know. Every telegram you sent for me, I would read it twice before walking away, just to have an excuse to linger." "I know," Gemma said softly. "I knew even then. And I sent them extra fast so I could handle more of your messages, so you would have more reasons to stay. We were both fooling ourselves, pretending it was about the telegrams." "It was never about the telegrams," Gemma agreed. "It was always about this, about us." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. Gemma thought about the long road that had brought them here, from that telegraph office in Council Bluffs to this porch in Nebraska. She thought about the baby she had carried then, Samuel, now a grown man with children of his own. She thought about all the children who had come after, about the thousands of telegrams she had sent, the hundreds of operators she had trained, the life she had lived. It had been a good life. Not perfect, not without grief and hardship, but good and full and rich with love. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked. "Everything," Gemma said. "The whole grand adventure of it all. Any regrets?" "Not a single one. You." Jacob pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "My only regret is that we do not have another 50 years ahead of us, but I will take whatever time we get and be grateful for it." "As will I," Gemma said. They stayed there until the stars came out, until the air turned cool and the crickets began their evening song. Inside the house, lamps glowed warm and welcoming. This was home, this place they had created together, this life they had built from nothing but love and determination and hard work. The telegraph key in Gemma's office sat silent now, a relic of a career that had spanned 3 decades. But sometimes, late at night when she could not sleep, Gemma would go to her office and sit at the desk. She would rest her fingers on the cool copper key and remember the music of it, the swift clicking rhythm that had once been as natural to her as breathing. She would remember the young widow she had been, pregnant and alone and desperately trying to survive. She would remember the cowboy who had walked through her door and changed everything. And she would whisper a prayer of gratitude to whatever providence had brought them together, had given her a second chance at love, had blessed her with a family and a career and a long, full life. In the years that followed, Jacob and Gemma grew old together with the kind of grace that comes from deep contentment. They traveled occasionally, visiting their children and grandchildren, but mostly they were happy to stay home, to work in their garden, to sit on their porch and watch the seasons change. Their grandchildren visited often, running wild through the house and yard, bringing noise and chaos and joy. Gemma told them stories about the old days, about working the telegraph and racing to send messages faster than anyone thought possible. The children listened with wide eyes, barely able to imagine a world where information moved at the speed of copper wire rather than instantly. Jacob told stories, too, about trail drives and cattle deals, about the Wild West that was already fading into legend by the time his grandchildren were born. He told them about walking into a telegraph office in Council Bluffs and meeting the woman who would change his life. "Your grandmother could work that telegraph key faster than any man in 5 states," he would say, his voice filled with pride. "I used to read her messages twice, just to have an excuse to stay near her a little longer." The grandchildren would giggle and ask if it was true, and Gemma would nod. "It is true, I was very fast, and he did read every message twice, though he pretended it was because he wanted to check for errors. I wanted to memorize your words," Jacob would say. "Every letter, every space. I thought if I could hold onto your words, I could hold on to you. And did it work?" The grandchildren would ask. Jacob would reach for Gemma's hand, and she would take it, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "It worked," he would say. "Here we are 50 years later still holding on." In the spring of 1910, Jacob fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his lungs and would not leave. The doctor tried various treatments, but nothing seemed to help. As summer arrived, Jacob grew weaker, spending most days in bed. Gemma nursed him with the same fierce determination she had brought to everything in her life. She made him special foods to tempt his appetite, read to him for hours, sat by his bedside through long nights. Their children came to visit, one by one, bringing their families to say goodbye to the man who had been such a steady presence in their lives. On a quiet morning in late July, with Gemma holding his hand and sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, Jacob took his last breath. He went peacefully, his face relaxing into the same expression of contentment he had worn for most of their marriage. Gemma sat with him for a long time after, still holding his hand, remembering. She remembered the tall cowboy walking into her telegraph office in Council Bluffs. She remembered the way he had looked at her, the way he had read her messages twice. She remembered his proposal, their wedding, the births of their children, the thousands of small moments that had woven their lives together into one shared story. She did not cry. The grief was there, deep and profound, but she had used up all her tears decades ago when Samuel's father died. This was different. This was not the crushing loss of potential unfulfilled, but the natural end of a life well lived and a love fully realized. They buried Jacob on a hill overlooking their property, with a simple stone marking his place. The funeral drew a huge crowd, friends and family, business associates and former colleagues. Person after person spoke about Jacob's integrity, his kindness, his unwavering devotion to his family. When it was Gemma's turn to speak, she stood at his graveside and said simply, "He was the best man I ever knew. He took me and my unborn child in when he had no obligation to do so. He loved me every day of our marriage with a constancy that never wavered. He was my partner, my friend, my great love. The world is diminished by his absence, but it was made better by his presence. I will miss him until I draw my last breath." After the funeral, life went on because it had to. Gemma stayed in the house they had shared, tending her garden, receiving visits from children and grandchildren. She was 67 years old, still sharp-minded and active, but without Jacob, the house felt too large and too empty. 6 months after Jacob's death, Samuel came to visit with a proposal. "Mother, come live in Chicago with us. The house is large enough and the grandchildren would love having you nearby." But Gemma shook her head. "This is my home. My memories of your father are here. I am not ready to leave them." She stayed in Nebraska, stayed in the house Jacob had bought for them decades ago. But she found new purpose in volunteering, teaching literacy at the local library, mentoring young women who wanted to learn telegraphy even though the technology was already becoming obsolete. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Gemma walked to the Telegraph office in Omaha. The technology had changed significantly since her day, but the core principles remained the same. She asked the supervisor if she could send one message, for old time's sake. The young operator on duty looked skeptical when this elderly woman claimed to know how to work the equipment. But he stepped aside and let her try. Gemma positioned her hands over the key, feeling the weight of it, the familiar resistance. And then she began to send, her fingers finding the old rhythm, the speed that had once made her legendary. She was slower now, the arthritis limiting her movements, but she was still fast, still precise. The message she sent was simple, addressed to no one, going nowhere. It said only, "I loved you. I love you still. I will love you always. G." She imagined Jacob somehow receiving it wherever he was, reading it twice the way he always had, smiling that smile that transformed his face. When she finished, the young operator was staring at her with his mouth open. "How did you do that? I have never seen anyone your age work that fast." "Practice," Gemma said, the same answer she had given Jacob all those years ago. "And love. Love makes everything possible." Gemma lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1918 at the age of 75. She had lived to see automobiles replace horses, to see airplanes take to the skies, to see the telegraph give way to telephones and wireless radio. She had lived to see women get the right to vote, though she did not live quite long enough to cast her ballot in the first election where it mattered. They buried her next to Jacob on the hill overlooking their property. The stone they placed beside his simply read, "Gemma Grant Emerson, the fastest telegraph operator in the West. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She lived with speed and died with grace." All 4 of her children attended the funeral, along with a small army of grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. They told stories about her career and her skills, about the training manuals she had written that were still being used by telegraph companies. They talked about her strength, her independence, her fierce love for her family. Samuel, now a distinguished lawyer in his 60s, stood at his mother's graveside and spoke of what she had meant to him. "She was my mother in every way that mattered," he said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. "She carried me, birthed me, and then married a man who loved me as his own son. She worked to provide for us when she had every reason to give up. She taught me that skill and determination can overcome almost any obstacle. She showed me what love looks like, both romantic and parental. I am the man I am because of her." Grace spoke next, fierce and proud even in her grief. "My mother taught me that being a woman does not mean accepting limitations. She was the fastest telegraph operator in the region because she refused to believe she could not be. She worked and raised 4 children because she refused to choose between career and family. She showed me it was possible to be brilliant at my work and devoted to my family at the same time. Every woman I treat as a doctor, every life I save, is a tribute to the example she set." The twins, Matthew and Michael, spoke together as they had done everything throughout their lives. They talked about growing up with a mother who was famous in her field, about the pride they felt watching her train other operators, about the love she had shown them every day despite her demanding career. "She never made us feel like we were in competition with her work," Matthew said. "And she never made us feel like her work was more important than we were," Michael added. "She balanced everything with a grace that made it look easy, even though we know now how hard it must have been." After the funeral, the family gathered at the house that had been Gemma and Jacob's home for so many years. They sorted through belongings, shared memories, divided up the small treasures that meant so much because of who had owned them. In Gemma's office, they found the old telegraph key, polished and well-maintained even though it had not been used regularly in years. They found her training manuals, her journals, her carefully preserved telegrams from important moments in history. They found a box of letters between her and Jacob, correspondence from his business trips, full of love and longing and everyday details. And they found one telegram, framed and hanging on the wall behind her desk, where she would have seen it every time she sat down. It was dated September 1878, addressed to Cheyenne, signed by Jacob Emerson. The message was mundane about cattle and prices, but someone had written in the margin in neat script. He read this twice before leaving. I knew then that he would change my life. Samuel took the telegraph key, saying he would pass it down to his children. Grace took the training manuals, planning to donate them to a museum. The twins took the framed telegram, wanting to preserve this tiny piece of their parents' love story. As the sun set on that spring day, the family stood together on the hill overlooking the property, looking at the two simple stones side by side. The wind blew through the grass, carrying the scent of new growth and possibilities. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, a sound that would have been familiar to both Gemma and Jacob, a reminder of the era they had lived through and helped to build. They had a good life together, Samuel said softly. They had a great love, Grace corrected. Which is rarer and more valuable than anything else. They built something that lasted, Matthew said. They built something that continues, Michael added. Look at all of us, all their descendants. We are their legacy, proof that their love created something permanent. As the family made their way back down the hill, the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the same colors Gemma and Jacob had watched together from their porch for so many years. The house stood empty now, waiting for new owners, new stories, new lives. But the story of Gemma and Jacob, of the pregnant widow who worked the telegraph key faster than any man and the cowboy who read her messages twice, that story lived on. It lived in the memories of their children and grandchildren. It lived in the training manuals still used to teach telegraph operators. It lived in the records of Western Union, in the small historical society in Council Bluffs, Iowa, where someone had preserved the story of the operator who started there and became a legend. Years later, one of Gemma's great-granddaughters, a young woman studying history, would research her famous ancestor. She would find newspaper articles about the speed contests Gemma had won, the tributes paid to her upon her retirement, the obituaries that called her a pioneer and an inspiration. She would find Jacob's business records, evidence of his success and integrity. She would piece together the story of how they met, how they courted, how they built a life together against the odds, and she would write it all down, preserving it for future generations. She would title it simply, The Telegraph Operator and the Cowboy, a Wild West Love Story. It would be published by a small historical press, read by people interested in women's history and the pioneer era. But more importantly, it would be read at family gatherings, passed down through the generations, becoming part of the family's mythology. Children would grow up hearing about their great-great-grandmother, who could work a telegraph key faster than anyone, and their great-great-grandfather who fell in love with her at first sight and read her messages twice just to stay near her a little longer. They would learn that love can come when you least expect it, that second chances are real, that determination and skill can overcome incredible obstacles. They would learn that a life well lived is not measured in fame or fortune, but in the love you give and receive, in the family you build, in the work you do with integrity and pride. The old telegraph key, passed down through generations, would become a family treasure. Parents would show it to their children, explaining what it was, how it worked, why it mattered. They would tell the story of Gemma's speed, of her dedication to her craft, of how she balanced career and family in an era when women were expected to choose one or the other. And always, always, they would tell the story of that first meeting in Council Bluffs, Iowa, in September of 1878. They would tell how Jacob walked into the telegraph office and saw Gemma working, how he kept sending unnecessary telegrams and reading her messages twice, how she sent them extra fast to give him more reasons to stay. They would tell how love grew from those small beginnings into something strong and lasting, something that survived hardship and loss, that brought joy and children and a lifetime of partnership. On warm summer evenings, descendants of Gemma and Jacob would gather on porches of their own, watching sunsets paint the sky in gold and crimson. They would hold hands with their partners, their spouses, their great loves. And they would remember the story of their ancestors, of the telegraph operator and the cowboy, of the love that started with clicks of a copper key and lasted beyond death. The legacy of that love continued, branching out through generations, touching lives far removed from the Wild West era. But the core of it remained the same: two people meeting at the right time, recognizing something in each other, choosing love despite the obstacles, building a life together with dedication and joy and unwavering commitment. In the end, that was the real story. Not the speed of Gemma's hands on the telegraph key, though that was impressive. Not Jacob's success in business, though that was admirable. The real story was the love they built together, the family they created, the life they shared. That was the legacy that mattered, the one that endured long after the telegraph technology became obsolete, long after the Wild West faded into history, long after their own lives ended. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, perhaps Gemma and Jacob were together still. Perhaps they sat on some celestial porch watching cosmic sunsets, her hand in his fingers intertwined with hers. Perhaps they looked down at their descendants with pride and love, pleased to see their story continuing, their legacy living on. The clicks of a telegraph key had brought them together. Love had kept them together. And the story of their love would echo through time, inspiring generation after generation to believe in second chances, in love at first sight, in the power of two people choosing each other and building something beautiful together. It was, in the end, a simple story. A pregnant widow, alone and struggling. A cowboy traveling through, looking for nothing but business. A chance meeting in a telegraph office in Council Bluffs, Iowa. And a love that grew from that meeting into something extraordinary, something that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The telegraph key had long since fallen silent, the copper worn smooth by countless messages sent and received. But if you held it in your hands and listened carefully, you might still hear the echo of Gemma's swift clicking rhythm. You might hear the sound of love being transmitted across time and space, from one heart to another. You might hear the beginning of a story that never truly ended, that lived on in the hearts and lives of everyone it touched. That was the power of love, after all. It did not end with death. It continued, transforming and evolving, but never disappearing. The love between Gemma and Jacob lived on in their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and beyond. It lived in every telegraph operator who benefited from Gemma's training techniques. It lived in every business deal conducted with the integrity Jacob exemplified. It lived in every marriage built on partnership and respect and enduring affection. Their story proved that love could flourish even in the hardest circumstances, that a pregnant widow could find happiness again, that a traveling cowboy could settle down and build a home, that two people from different backgrounds could come together and create something beautiful and lasting. The Wild West was a hard place, a dangerous place, a place where life was uncertain and death came quickly. But it was also a place where anything was possible, where people could reinvent themselves, where love could bloom in unexpected places. Gemma and Jacob were proof of that. Their story was Wild West romance at its finest, real and raw and absolutely true. And so their story ended not with their deaths, but with the continuation of their legacy. The telegraph key silent but not forgotten. The love story complete but never over. The romance that started with swift fingers on copper keys and messages read twice living on in the hearts of everyone who heard about it. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, but more than that. It was a story of love conquering all obstacles, of two people finding each other at exactly the right moment, of a life built together with patience and dedication and joy, of a love that truly lasted forever, not in some abstract sense, but in the concrete reality of children raised, grandchildren loved, great-grandchildren inspired by the example their ancestors set. The sun set on Gemma and Jacob's time, but it rose again on their descendants. Their love story was not an ending but a beginning, the start of a family line that would stretch forward into centuries they could not have imagined. And at the heart of it all was that moment in September 1878 when a cowboy walked into a telegraph office in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and saw a pregnant widow working the telegraph key faster than any man alive. He read her messages twice. She sent them extra fast. And from those small beginnings grew a love that would echo through time, proving that even in the hardest circumstances, even when all seems lost, love can find a way. Love always finds a way. That was the true message transmitted by Gemma's swift fingers on that telegraph key, the message that Jacob read twice because he recognized its truth. Love conquers all. Love endures forever. Love is what makes life worth living. And they lived that truth every day of their long marriage, proving it over and over until their last breaths. Then they passed that truth on to their children, who passed it to their children, who would pass it on in turn. The telegraph technology faded into history, but the love story remained, as fresh and vital as the day it began. That was the legacy of Gemma Grant and Jacob Emerson. Not just a family line, though that was important. Not just success in their respective fields, though that mattered. Their real legacy was the proof that love, real love, enduring love was possible. That it was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth building a life around. In the end, that was the only message that truly mattered. The one Gemma sent every time she touched that telegraph key. The one Jacob received every time he read her words twice. The one they transmitted to everyone whose life they touched. Love is real, love is powerful, love is forever. And that message, sent over copper wires in the Wild West of 1878, continued to transmit through the years, through the decades, through the generations. It echoed still in the hearts of their descendants, in the story told and retold at family gatherings, in the old telegraph key preserved as a treasure. It lived on, that message of love, proving that some things truly are eternal, that some stories never end, that some loves last forever and beyond.